ASOC, among other things, holds the only non-governmental environmental seat at the Antarctic Treaty Systems tables. And it's an umbrella NGO, and among its members are WWF, Greenpeace, the Pew Charitable Trusts, Korean Federation of Environmental Movements, Australian Conservation Foundation, and many other groups. This is the first time at an IUCN meeting we've had a joint Arctic-Antarctic event, and I think it's very appropriate at this time for lots of reasons which our speakers will help explore. Both regions are suffering pretty seriously from climate change and are kind of mirrors to the world about what's happening to the whole planet. It's worth noting that the International Maritime Organization is negotiating a polar code for shipping that would cover both poles, and that's very important. We'll hear a bit more about that. In 2009, there was the first ever joint meeting of the Arctic Council of Governments and Antarctic Treaty consultative parties in Washington, D.C., which was a good first step, and we'll talk a little bit about how that can be taken further. Although the regions are very different physically and in terms of their governance, we believe that the governance structures can learn from each other, and that's one of the things we want to explore in this session. So we've got an interesting group of speakers. We're going to leave time in the program between the two parts of the sessions for some questions and discussion, and at the end we'll have a wrap-up discussion. And I would say at the outset that after each speaker, if any of you has a burning question that you want to ask that speaker, I'll take one question right then. Otherwise, we're going to do it in groups. But if something really is penetrating, ask me for the floor and I'll let you ask your question. We also have Ambassador Van Cleveren, is that how you pronounce it? Close, I'm not quite right. From Monaco, and I'd like to invite you to come up and make a few initial observations, if you would. Okay?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you today and to exchange about all the polar issue, Arctic and Antarctic. And I just want to say some words on behalf of Prince Albert, which is very involved in this question and very concerned by the future of all the world, but mainly and more acute concern on the polar region. And as such, Prince Albert, his foundation and the government want to work at the both polar level. And the foundation was engaged in a lot of program and to raise the concern of people on this issue. One of the way to do it was to raise the concern of the young people, and as such, Monaco was supporting this very beautiful action, Student on Ice, which permits a lot of young people to go and to see what are the reality of the polar region, mostly the Arctic region. Prince Albert Foundation is also acting with the University of the Arctic to try to gather together the people of living in the Arctic, to exchange what are their concerns, what are their solutions, and how they can manage the future with this huge problem that we have, and sometimes huge solution to about the climate change. The main idea about biodiversity of the Prince Albert is species conservation, clearly, but also marine protected area. And there was recently in the Iozu big exhibition, the Monaco Blue Initiative, which tried to gather very different people together about this issue of marine protected area. I should say industrial people, fishermen, people from finance, and to try to look at the protected area not only as a goal, not only as a final goal, but as a solution, how to manage the ocean, where are the needs of a protected area, and where there is no need of a protected area, and not to build paper protected area. That is the the main idea that we share. I know it's when I say that, I remember when I was in Rio 20 years ago, said, but look, you said exactly the same thing. So what is new? That is the problem. What is new from Rio to Rio? What is new, and how we can be more concrete? One thing which is very important, and the Prince Albert Foundation is looking on, is this way of look at the value. What are the true value? What are the true richness? How we can increase richness? All this market value actually is totally the way to forget that we are making debt. Environment, not only environmental debt, now we see that we have finance debt, which are more concrete for some people, but they are also hidden, the true debt that we are creating. And that is the reason on which the Prince Albert and Prince Albert Foundation and the Prince Albert policy is totally linked with this question of valuation of environmental biodiversity and ecosystem services, which is for us one of the new way to think about a new vision for the Earth. And this question of marine protected area, in this way of thinking, Prince Albert exchanged that with President Putin in a recent meeting in Arkhangelsk, and trying to use in the Arctic region zones which are quite already protected because of our military zone. And it's more easy to protect a zone which was military than a zone which is economically used. And that's why we have some zones that we can, I should say frozen, I should say frozen in the Arctic, but in a certain sense. The zone where people were not acting, I don't say destroying the environment, because military activity sometimes are worse than industrial one, but to look where is the potential to act quickly and with efficiency, and after to go where there is more difficult, but not to forget that there are places where we can act immediately. And that is one of the way to look on Arctic region. There is a big potential. There is a lot of people wishing to act. We were speaking some time ago about the NGO in the Arctic. I know that they are sometimes separated. They can act together but they are like the Roman military legion. They work separately, but sometimes they can meet to battle. I think that is the good way to act. So that is the way that we are thinking on Arctic and Antarctic in Monaco under the auspices of the Prince Albert. I know that we are far away from the Arctic. I know that our concern, our immediate and daily concern, is not this kind of concern, but I think that we have a huge responsibility and a huge potential. I think a lot of people like Prince Albert, like a lot of king, prince in the world, can act together to bring a message which is a message of a new way to look on the nature and the use of nature. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Our first speaker today is David van der Zwag. He is a professor in Canada Research Chair in Ocean Law and Governance at the Marine and Environmental Law Institute, big long phrase, at Dalhousie University. He co-chairs the IUCN Commission on Environmental Law Specialist Group on Oceans, Coast, and Coral Reef. He's written extensively about polar governance issues and co-led the writing of the Ocean Governance chapter of the Arctic Council's report in 2009. So I'd like to ask David to come out. He's going to kind of frame part of the rest of the discussion on the Arctic side.
Thanks, Jim. In the wake of decreasing sea ice and projected increase in human uses such as shipping, fishing, mining, hydrocarbon developments, the adequacy of existing governance arrangements is increasingly coming into question by academics, by NGOs, etc. There's only one narrow, binding regional treaty historically for the Arctic, the Agreement on Conservation of Polar Bears. 5 states having polar bears agree to protect polar bear dens and ecosystems, to prohibit takings with a few exceptions, such as subsistence hunting, self-defense to save human life, and scientific purposes. The key institutional mechanism for facilitating regional cooperation in the Arctic Council, has been criticized for its various limitations, including it depends on a non-binding legal declaration back in 1996, limping along with inadequate funding, voluntary funding overall, being prohibited from addressing military security issues, acting largely as a study and talk shop, a lot of great assessments, but again having limited governance implications, and lacking power to develop regional environmental standards. The Arctic Council, of course, has the 8 Arctic states, the 5 coastal states plus Finland, Sweden, and Iceland, and of course permanent participants, which is very unique. You have 6 indigenous organizations that also have full participation except for voting, but have a major voice in the Arctic as we speak. Today, I just want to very quickly flag 2 images I think capture where we are with Arctic ocean governance. One is edging forward. Arctic states have clearly rejected various suggestions from academics and NGOs for some kind of comprehensive treaty regime like we have for the Antarctic. They're not interested in that right now, at least. And Arctic states prefer an incremental approach, I call it, to cooperation, with 3 particularly important edging forward efforts that could be quickly summarized, and I emphasize quick, because I will finish before 15 minutes, as we agreed. Committing to strengthen the Arctic Council, implementing recommendations on shipping from the shipping assessment of 2009, undertaking an Arctic Ocean review. I'll just quickly flag those. And then the second image I want to quickly flag is a sea of challenges. A host of challenges still loom on the governance horizon. And I'm just going to flag one of them, the future governance for the Central Arctic Ocean beyond national jurisdiction. I think that's a huge issue looming. And then I'm going to just flag at the very end 9 additional challenges at the end to provide a top 10 list. When you go away, these are not the only ones, but 10 that I think are really fundamental. And I'll kind of introduce our next speakers as well. So very quickly, Committee to Strengthen the Arctic Council. At the Nuuk Ministerial meeting in May 2011, countries did make key commitments towards strengthening the Arctic Council. They agreed finally to establish a permanent secretariat based in Tromsø. The secretary used to hop around every 2 years where the chair would go. Now they're going to say, let's keep an administrative center in Tromsø, Norway. And they agreed to fund it up to around $1 million of funding. And they actually have financial rules they further agreed to now, where Norway is going to pick up 42.5% of the funding, and then the other all Arctic states will contribute the rest. So they have some funding finally, some secure funding for administration, which is very important. Observers to the Council, Japan, Republic of Korea, China, EU, they've all been trying to join the club as observers. And again, that became very controversial. And of course, they really didn't have criteria set out, clear criteria for admitting observers. So they now have come up with 7 criteria, and I won't go through the list, but they have developed criteria for admitting observers. For example, respect the values, interests, culture, and traditions of the Arctic indigenous peoples. They recognize the extensive legal framework that applies to the Arctic Ocean. They're very general criteria. We'll have to see if they really work in practice. I think there'll be a lot of politics still involved for future admissions of observers, but they've at least got the criteria in place. The second edging forward is this Arctic Marine Shipping Assessment Report. I think it's kind of a breakthrough report for the Arctic Council. Not because I contributed to it, because just the fact that it's a living document with 17 recommendations, and it really is driving, I would say, a lot of law reform already. Ministers have agreed there that we should enter into international negotiation for a mandatory polar code, and of course that initiation started in 2009, and we're continuing. We'll hear more about that from a further speaker. Again, you'll see in May 2011, Arctic ministers signed a regional agreement on cooperation, aeronautical and maritime search and rescue. They appointed a task force to come up with that agreement. That's a major breakthrough coming out of that shipping assessment. And they further agreed to establish a task force to develop an international instrument on Arctic oil, marine pollution, preparedness and response by the next ministerial meeting in 2013. And they've agreed that will be a legally binding treaty for the region. So you see actually edging forward step by step in a few areas where countries want to cooperate even formally. And then the final edging forward I'll just mention because of time is the Arctic Ocean Review. The PAIN, Protection Arctic Marine Environment Working Group, has initiated an Arctic Ocean Review with 2 phases. Phase 1, they actually published a report in May 2011, giving a descriptive overview of all the regional global agreements that apply to the Arctic and what the countries are doing in terms of their ratification. And now phase 2 is suggesting options for strengthening global and regional agreements and measures for the management of the Arctic marine environment. The final report to Arctic Council ministers in 2013. And this is one to keep an eye on because they're going to have chapters on oil and gas, on shipping, on pollution, on ecosystem-based management, how you push it forward, on living marine resources. And so it's going to come up with quite a few recommendations on ways forward. And they'll have a meeting next week in Halifax, where I live, the Payne Working Group, to kind of come up with the first look at the draft papers. And I'll just say it remains to be seen how influential it will be, because at the end of the day, it's going to be the recommendation expected to be negotiated by representatives of the 8 Arctic states. And I see at least one person very much involved in that, and I'm not prejudging because I think it could actually come out with some very good recommendations, but we have to see how far these recommendations will go. The second image very quickly is a sea of challenges. And I want to flag now a little bit this issue of the area in the Central Arctic Ocean beyond national jurisdiction. You have this large donut hole right there in the middle in the darker color. That's high seas, essentially beyond national jurisdiction. And when all the Arctic coastal states eventually delimit the extended continental shelves, how far they can go out on the seabed, the actual seafloor, you're likely to still have a couple pockets of deep seabed beyond national jurisdiction as well. And I won't take that picture. That's from 2006. I think we're going to see a very different picture come out. But that's one portrayal by one of the writers in the area. Now, we've had all kinds of suggestions on how to move forward on governing that area beyond national jurisdiction, establishment of a regional fisheries management organization, possible expansion of the Northeast Atlantic Fisheries Commission. The Commission actually has jurisdiction up into the Arctic already, so one can perhaps expand that over the top of the Arctic. Some people have suggested a regional ocean management organization. Let's get something innovative here. You could have an Arctic Ocean Framework Convention that applies not only to the coastal states, but even the high seas of the Arctic. You could even have a declaration of governance principles, including a precautionary approach to new resource development. So you have a real spectrum of options being put out there by academics, by NGOs, and others. While the Arctic Council has not specifically addressed this area of areas beyond national jurisdiction governance, representatives of the 5 Arctic coastal states did meet in 2008 in Ilulissat, Greenland, and they came up with a declaration. And they indicated that the law of the sea provides a solid foundation for managing that area amongst the Arctic states, but also non-Arctic states. And under that law of the sea approach, then various freedoms would be open to all states: freedom of fishing, freedom of navigation, freedom of marine scientific research. And mineral exploration and exploitation of deep seabed would come under the jurisdiction of the National Seabed Authority, which eventually could license some of that deep seabed mining if it ever occurs. And flag state jurisdiction would prevail as the prime principle for controlling activities. And of course, the Law of the Sea Convention puts all kinds of responsibilities on states as well: protect and preserve the marine environment, cooperate in managing any kind of fish stocks up there, undertake environmental impact assessments for any activities that occur in that areas beyond national jurisdiction. And then we have the 1995 Implementation Agreement on straddling and highly migratory fish stocks. And again, it calls for application of precautionary and ecosystem approaches and commitment to establish sub-regional or regional fisheries management organization arrangement where no such organization arrangement exists for a particular straddling or highly migratory fish stock. Again, very little is known about the fish stocks up in the Central Arctic Ocean. Again, a lot of questions. Will there actually be commercial fisheries up there? So a lot of uncertainty that prevails. Future governance arrangements remain very uncertain, with at least 3 main approaches possible. And I'll just quickly flag these. In my own mind, these are 3 main ways possible forward. One is a reactive approach. Arctic states just wait. Wait till a Chinese fishing vessel shows up, and then you react and decide what you're going to do. So that's one approach. Not probably a healthy approach, and I wouldn't recommend it, but that's certainly an option. The second one is a global first strategy, I would call it. As many of you know, within the UN system, we have great debates going on about the future governance regime for high seas, areas beyond national jurisdiction. We had a panel last night on that topic. And so, you know, countries might want to wait till we resolve that kind of debate and then eventually come back to the Arctic and where it fits under this whole process. I'm not going to go into all the details because of time, But you have two major fora, the UN Open-Ended Informal Consultative Process on Oceans and Law of the Sea. They've looked at the high seas governance issues a couple times in 2004, again in 2007, and it keeps coming up in the annual meetings on the side occasionally. And of course, the other major forum is the ad hoc open-ended informal working group on areas beyond national jurisdiction. This long title of the working group. They've met 5 times already, trying to figure out ways forward and how we're going to move forward on the governance regime for areas beyond national jurisdiction. And frankly, two main bones of contention seem to be at the heart of all this. One is this whole question of is there a governance gap in relation to marine genetic resources? One view is that there is no governance gap. We have a freedom of the seas that applies, first come, first serve. They're going to be subject to environmental protection assessment responsibilities. It's not a total free-for-all. There's still responsibility of states to make sure it goes forward in some kind of a responsible manner. The other view is that genetic resources beyond national jurisdiction should be considered part of the common heritage of mankind, requiring fair access and benefit sharing, supporting the need for new regulatory and practical measures. So you have basic differences of opinion amongst states in the world today. A second contention point is whether there should be a new implementation